This past week, two very well-known people in our country committed suicide. Kate Spade, who was a fashion designer, and Anthony Bourdain, who's a chef, and later on a TV personality. And although these are not isolated incidences, it's sort of like with many things. We sort of forget about these issues until it happens to someone very well known or someone close to us. And then it is brought back to our attention. A report by the Center for Disease Control states that from 1999 to 2016, suicide rates increased in our country by 25%. So those numbers are on the rise. And this is an important topic to address. Because many people, maybe even someone or some people in this church, are struggling very seriously with issues in their lives. And even though this is a widespread thing, depression and anxiety are on the rise, a lot of people are still afraid or ashamed to talk about it, to bring it up when they are struggling. Because they feel like if they admit to the fact that they're struggling, they're somehow weak. Or they're going to be labeled, right, as the person who's depressed or anxious. But let me be the first to say that everyone has problems. Right? This is not to belittle those who struggle with serious issues, but hopefully to comfort that everyone struggles with something on some level. And so my problems are maybe different than yours, and yours may be different than the person sitting next to you, but we all have our issues. And so it's not a sign of weakness when we ask for help. Instead, it's a sign that we want to be healthy. It's a sign that we are humble. Now, what can we learn about these issues from our faith and from our readings today? In the first reading, we heard from the book of Genesis. Right, it's right after the fall of man, and God is looking for Adam. He says, "Where are you?" And how does Adam respond? He says, "Well, I heard you in the garden, and I was ashamed or afraid because I was naked, and so I hid myself." After Adam fell, after he committed the first sin, he hid himself from God. And we inherit that tendency. That whenever we do something wrong, we want to hide ourselves because we're ashamed. We want to cut ourselves off. We want to isolate ourselves from God and from others around us. But this is not good. Because it's in those moments that we need most our friends, our family. It's in those moments that we need most God to help us out of that shame. So thankfully, we hear in the reading that God doesn't leave us alone. Right? God is the one who went out in search for Adam. God went out and looked for him and called him back to himself. He tried to restore that relationship with him. And so there certainly were consequences to Adam's actions, but those consequences ultimately were meant to bring man back to himself, to restore that relationship and to heal him. Our responsorial psalm shines some light on this too. It reminds us of why we should never be afraid to bring our troubles to the Lord. We heard and we sang together, "With the Lord there is mercy and fullness of redemption." Not scolding, not embarrassment, but mercy and fullness of redemption. And it's not only a limited mercy. It's not only if you struggle with certain things, but not with those things, because those are taboo. It's not only if you were raised or born in a certain place or raised in a certain way, but with the Lord, for those who come to him, for those who bring him their burdens, for those who sincerely want to change, even if they don't change right away, there is mercy and fullness of redemption. I'd been hearing about this phenomenon for a few years, that those suicide rates were rising, and this report of the CDC confirms that. But I don't think it's good enough for us to know that something is happening. We need to know why so that we can work on fixing it. So what is the cause of this increase of people wanting to take their own lives or resorting to it? I have to admit that this is obviously a very complex issue, and I don't pretend to know all of the answers. But I do think that a big part of the reason for this is the isolation that I mentioned earlier. That the world today seems to cater to this isolation, right? The way that we live fosters this. Most of us sit behind a computer for a large portion of the day, cut off from other people. When we're not working, or maybe sometimes when we're supposed to be working, we're consumed with our cell phone or iPad or some other device that cuts us off from other people. And most of us, a lot of times, care more about what's happening on social media than we do about the person sitting right in front of us. Right? I can't tell you how many times I've seen in a restaurant or in a house people sitting together, not saying a word to each other, right? Looking at their phone because they're more worried about that than the people in front of them. And so we're disconnecting ourselves from meaningful relationships. We're having trouble forming those, and so whenever we are struggling, we find it even more difficult to reach out to someone because we don't trust people, because we don't know them, because we haven't spent that time developing those relationships. And so I'm not saying that the devil himself has created technology and media to distract us, but there are serious issues with overuse, and we have to address them. We have to attack them head on. And I said this before, but I'll say it again because I didn't listen very well as a kid. I don't listen very well now. So I need to hear things over and over for them to sink in. And so this issue is especially dangerous for young children. And so parents, you have work to do, right? There have been studies by secular media, right? This is not a faith thing. There have been studies done by secular institutions that show that because children are developing so rapidly at that young age, that it's really bad for them to be constantly stimulated by screens. Right? It causes delays in development of their brain. It shows that it stunts their growth. It increases anxiety. If you don't believe me, find a child who's playing with a screen and take it away from them. And then run away and let the parent deal with it. Right? They're going to lose their minds. It increases that anxiety. And it makes kids less social. Again, observe a kid that's always on a screen and go try to have a conversation with them. I'm not picking on kids today because I wasn't very good at conversation when I was a kid. You might not think I'm good at it now. But it doesn't help if they're constantly stimulated by these things. And another problem with constant social media use for everyone is that we don't see reality when we look at social media. Right? People normally are in the habit of posting only the most wonderful things of their lives, right? Things that are going to impress other people. And so we scroll through these things and we see people taking trips and winning awards and getting married and doing all these things, which aren't bad. But we think that if we're not doing that, then somehow we're not as good. Like we are less human because we're not doing all of these wonderful things that we see. And so we need to disconnect from these things from time to time. Right? We as a society need to spend more time with people. It sounds terrible, I know. But we need to do it, right? With people who can bring us joy, who can make us laugh, with people who might annoy us, with people who can be there for us whenever we need them. We have to do it. And so this subject of suicide is not an easy subject to talk about, but it's important. And so if you're struggling, if you're going through something, talk to someone. If you're afraid, if you're nervous, if you're ashamed, then bring it to the confessional. Right? That place where you have the guarantee that we can't talk about. Right? If I say something, if I connect a sin to somebody that happened in confession, it's serious punishment for me. It has to go to Rome for it to be undone. Right? So bring it to the safety of the confessional and try to get help. Now, if you come to confession and mention thinking about harming yourself, and I think it's a problem, I think it's serious, then I'm going to suggest that you get help. But I can't make you, I can't say anything. Right? I'm just going to try to help. And parents, I know I've said it before, I'll say it again, probably again and again. Please, I beg you not to give your kids phones and iPads and all of these other things with connection to the internet. Don't give it to them at all. But once they do need it, when they start driving, give them a phone that can call. That's it. They don't need to be texting because they're going to do it while they're driving. They don't need to be getting on the internet because they're not going to go to good things. Be loving enough of your children to be willing to let them be mad at you. That's hard. But love them enough to let them hate you for a little while because you didn't give them a phone. If you want lessons on how to be unpopular, come talk to me. Very skilled in that. We need to commit ourselves as a church, as a society, to good human relationships so that we can help people who are in need, so that we don't become isolated, and so that problems that we have don't seem too big to overcome. And we trust that there is nothing that we can't overcome with the help of God's grace. Right? Scripture tells us that things that are impossible become possible for God because He's God. Right? And we trust, because of what we prayed together in this psalm, that in the Lord there is always waiting for us mercy and fullness of redemption.